Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Unacademy, the one-stop destination for the civil services English medium aspirants. Welcome to the daily Hindu analysis. Before we move any further, please let me know in the live chat box if I'm clearly audible and visible. Please write yes in the live chat. All right, everything looks good. Let's move ahead. An important announcement: on account of the festivities, we have brought for you Shiksha Mahotsav. In this, you get a very lucrative offer in case you're willing to buy the subscription for next year's preparation. If you're preparing for 2026 and you buy a 6 months program, you get a 6 months program free of cost. But in case you're preparing for 2027 and you purchase a 1 year's program, you first get a 12 months extension free of cost. Along with that, we make sure that in case you have appeared for prelims and by any chance you have not cleared the prelims exam, we will assure that your preparation is taken till the last stage. And therefore, other than the 12 months extension that is given free of cost, we will also give another 12 months of Assure related extension. Now, this Assure, of course, is based on certain terms and conditions. For instance, it is for serious students. We will see if you've completed a certain set of hours on the platform, you have attempted certain tests, and you have submitted your prelims admit card as well. This offer is ending tomorrow, so make full use of it. Now, let's start with the important topics that we are discussing. Almost 10 topics that we are covering today, and let's dive into the first topic. 8 states with international borders but 0.13% of exports only. Now, this is important from the GS3 point of view relating to economy. How are economic policies made in the country? When it comes to trade, when it comes to exports, are economic policies absolutely skewed towards some states only? Is this form of export-led development a little lopsided towards certain states in India and ignoring the other regions that constitute India as well? So therefore, in the context of GS paper 3, any kind of trade, exports, etc. are very important for the examination. This is also in the light of Trump's tariff. The Trump administration has imposed multiple tariffs almost amounting to 50% on Indian exports. And therefore, in light of the Trump administration related tariffs, it is important to highlight and to reassess our export strategy. Why? Because we must not only react to these kind of tariffs, we also must look within and understand certain structural problems in India's export basket as well. So the idea about this editorial is not just mere reaction to any international relations that happen, but it is also associated with taking up structural reforms. What do you mean by structural reforms? Reforms relating to logistics, relating to internal policies, trade strategic documents, and logistics or industrial corridors as well. Structural reforms can also be the aspect relating to infrastructure, a lot of easy form of logistics, ease of doing business, etc. These kind of aspects, according to the author, should also be focused on. So therefore, let's dive into the editorial and see what all the editorial is talking about. Now, in this instance, let's understand the lopsided export pattern. What do you mean by lopsided? Heavily tilted towards few states and not covering the other states. That means if you look at the exports from India, we see that only few states, in fact just 4 coastal states, comprise 70% of the exports from the country. These states are the heavily industrialized states such as Maharashtra, Gujarat, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu. They constitute 70% of exports from the country. That is a huge number. And therefore, what is the problem with this kind of an aspect? The problem is that yes, the exports from these few states are massive, but we still have almost a huge coastline. along with the northeastern sector that has more than 5,500 kilometers of international borders, and we are not leveraging that potential. Therefore, this 70% of exports is primarily because of the industrialized nature of these states. Other states, for instance, in India, for example, Bihar, UP, etc., even though they have international borders, even the northeastern states have international borders towards Myanmar, Bangladesh, etc. But we are not being able to leverage that because of also the policy relating to lack of industrialization in those areas. These four states are primarily the industrialized states. For example, IT industries, textile industries, chemical industries, automobile industries are all concentrated in these regions of India only. Even when we talk about exports, any form of logistic supports becomes very crucial. And therefore, we see that it is in these states where the ports infrastructure, the connectivity from ports to the hinterland regions, the last mile connectivity from factories till the port regions is ensured in these regions only. You hear about industrial corridors, you hear about Delhi, Mumbai industrial corridors as well as highways. These are creating the impetus for these exports to boom in these regions. So port infrastructure in these regions is also excessively focused as compared to other states as well. For example, the JNPT port, for example, the Mundra port, the Vizag port, etc., etc. They create an easy way for ensuring the to and fro movement of goods, and that is what we call as logistics, right? So therefore, the problem of highly industrialized states, only highly industrialization concentrated in a few regions, supporting infrastructure in the form of highways, port, interland connectivity, inland water connectivity, etc., is also highly skewed in these regions only, which is why it is normal to know and see that it is in fact just these states that are also receiving huge amount of international investments. Most of the FDI that comes in India is concentrated in these regions only. And therefore, the divide and the bridge between these prosperous states versus the other states keeps on widening. And therefore, this is not just an export problem for India, but it is also a matter of regional disparity as well. Let's read certain statistics that have been given in the editorial, which we can use in our answers as well. Gujarat, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka account for more than 70% of all merchandise exports from India. In fact, Gujarat alone accounts for 33%, one-third of the exports. 8 states, that means when we talk about the northeastern states, they have been significantly marginalized according to the author, and 8 states in the northeast which have more than 5,000 kilometers of international border, be it with China, Myanmar, Bangladesh, so on and so forth. They account for just merely 0.13%. A way to remember can be less than 1% for 8 states put together. And that is a concerning number. So having seen that data, let's understand what are the neglected regions. The main highlight of the article is about the marginalization and neglect of the northeastern sector. The author says that yes, this sector, because of the international border, almost 5,000 plus international border, has huge amount of potential. That means, in fact, even in the policy documents earlier, we have seen Northeast as a potential of acting as a bridge for the Act East policy. That means when we want to enhance our trade with the Eastern countries, for example, the ASEAN countries, for example, the countries such as Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, etc., as well as the other ASEAN countries, it is important to use Northeast and enhance connectivity of the Northeast using highway projects, using multinational highway projects, etc. For example, the IMT the highway. For example, the India, Myanmar and Thailand highway project. So the idea was to utilize the Northeast as a potential for ensuring that we engage with the Eastern countries much better. But this has merely been on policy documents alone, according to the author. The real work when it comes to infrastructure development, connectivity, ease of reaching, that is logistics, has not happened, and therefore it only contributes to 0.3%. Therefore, the author suggests that we have heavily focused only in ensuring infrastructural development in some regions, while the road, railway, inland, etc. connectivity in Northeast is severely lacking. And therefore, the author also suggests that we are not just ensuring, these regions are not just neglected when it comes to final infrastructure. These are also neglected when it comes to policy making. What does that mean? That means in the policy making domain, for example, the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council is basically to advise and aid the decisions made by the higher command, and therefore this policy making in the Economic Advisory Council of the Prime Minister, there is not even a single member from the northeastern states that represents the northeastern states. This is the amount of neglect when it comes to the governance. This is the amount of administrative apathy that is showcased to the northeastern sector. Another important aspect is that multiple of these border posts now, because certain adjoining regions of Northeast are also destabilized states. For example, the destability in Bangladesh, the instability in Myanmar. Because of this, we had to make our trade points not as mere trade points, but rather now they are working as choke points in order to just fulfill surveillance related purposes. They were not to expedite trade. They were not to facilitate trade. And therefore, most of these trade points between Myanmar and India, for example, the More trade points or the More checkpoint is something that you would hear of. Those have in fact become choke points, surveillance points, and just points to ensure security of the region. These are not seen as checkpoints to facilitate trade. That is why we see that these checkpoints in fact lack any kind of warehousing, customs related support, and therefore also ensures huge amount of bureaucratic delay. There is a lot of paperwork involved, there is lack of single window clearance, and therefore trade hugely suffers in these neglected regions. The policy neglect and the lack of representation in bodies such as the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council is concerning. Even when we recently made a strategic document on India's export, there was no mention of the sector that is the northeastern sector. So therefore, we do not even discuss in our policy documents, vision documents, about how we are going to be using the northeastern sector. There is excessive focus. That means there is only focus on countering the security situation in the region, the insurgency situation in the region. In fact, one of the best antidote to insurgency or instability is development. Development most of the time is the answer to that situation. But if we overwhelmingly only focusing on containing insurgency, using hard power, using military power, that cannot be the lasting solution. Therefore, another example is the IMT, India-Myanmar-Thailand trilateral highway has been underdeveloped. It has remained merely on paper and it has not led to the full development of it. So these are the neglected regions that we have spoken about. And therefore, these are the examples that are given in the editorial. Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council has no representation of a northeastern member. Even the new foreign trade strategic export plan that we had made had no mention of using the northeastern corridor. And these become the concerning problems. For instance, the editorial also says that it is not because of certain erratic policies of Western countries. For instance, the Trump administration, etc. It might not be the exports from Maharashtra, Gujarat, etc. that are the most hard hit. In fact, it is the exports from these areas which still are working in an unorganized setup. They will be impacted. For example, the plantation sector in the Assam, in the West Bengal sectors are going to be hugely impacted with any kind or lessening of buyers or reduction in the competitiveness of Indian tea. So therefore, there will be worries when it comes to the plantation sector, when it comes to the tea industry that is situated in states such as Assam, situated in states such as West Bengal. And therefore, they would need certain amount of protection and hand-holding services. Most of the plantation here is not of high value packaging. Most of the plantation here is not sold in a very good branded format. And therefore, we never truly fully exploited the potential of the plantation industries in these regions. Another major issue is the refineries. For example, the Numaligarh refinery in Assam. The Numaligarh refinery is procuring huge amount of oil from example Oil India, ONGC, etc. They had to also procure, their refinery capacity is increasing, and therefore it is also important for them to procure oil from ports, for example the Paradip port, etc. in Odisha. In that context, any kind of sanctions that are going to tighten the norms when it comes to procuring Russian oil will again directly impact the refineries, for example Numaligarh refinery in the state of Assam. So these are going to be the hard hit examples that you can also quote in the examples, and therefore say that industrialized states can in fact tide over these kind of disruptions. But these states without any support from the center, infrastructure, logistics, branding, policy, etc. might be extremely hard hit in this context. So therefore, let's understand what are the issues and concerns with this kind of a trade pattern. The biggest issue and concern is economic vulnerability. Now, what do you mean by economic vulnerability? If there are economic shocks, that means we have seen multiple countries, Western countries, etc., multiple trade blocs that are forming, and therefore we see erratic trade policies in the world that we live in today. Trade policies are changing by the minute. Trade deals are being left by the minute. And therefore, in these times of uncertainty, any kind or relying on any few industries particularly can create vulnerability for the entire exports market for India. If there are only a few industries that we are focusing on, for example, the IT industry, the textile industry, the automobiles industry, etc. And if those industries only are the hard hit sectors due to these uncertain trade policies, the entire exports from India can therefore be at risk, and therefore it is very important for hedging our risk. What do you mean by hedging? To create a good composition of exports. Exports that are diversified in nature, that are not relying on only one industry. Yes, few industries can be specialized. Specialization is also welcome. But in this time of globalization, where one country's trade policies directly impact the exports of other countries, the idea is to create a more diversified basket that can hedge the risks relating to erratic trade policies. And therefore, focusing on only these few states and these few industries is going to increase the risk that India is taking. It can severely dent India's export at any time and therefore create huge amount of disruptions. We also see if we are focusing only on a few ports, for example, the JNPT port is taking up huge amount of exports or merchandise export that goes from India, even refinery related export. Any kind of port disruption or any kind of waterways disruption. For example, you had seen in the context of Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean region, there was huge amount of disruption due to the Houthi rebels of Yemen, a lot of disruptions because of piracy near Somalia, and therefore those choke points, and therefore ports can absolutely become can become very vulnerable to these kind of choke points in the maritime routes. And those, therefore, we must always keep not just maritime but also land related routes absolutely clear. There has been a tendency for India to overwhelmingly focus only on maritime routes. Is that not the case? Excessive focus on shipping routes, excessive focus on maritime routes. What we also have to focus now on is land related connectivity that can also be a promise in times of instability, in times of risks. Absolutely. The land connectivity in the form of dry ports can come in handy whenever there is some form of disruption. This is also concerning not just from the exports or the economic point of view. This is also concerning from the regional imbalance point of view. When we are only focusing on development through exports of few states, are we really creating an inclusive India? Or are we relating to or allowing for regional imbalances to happen? Please note, regional imbalances are never without a reaction. More the regional imbalance, more the amount of discontent. More the amount of discontent, it can very easily slip into insurgency, discontent with the center, separatist feelings and demands. For example, the insurgency in the Northeast can also be a product of lack of development and vice versa. So therefore, regional imbalances are very important to correct, and therefore this is a concern. Why? Because this leads to the feeling and the ideology of regionalism that can sometimes also heighten in the form of separatist demands that can pose a major security concern for the state of India. So fuel tensions and insurgency and discontent can also become a national security threat. It should not just be seen as just a mere economic pattern that is visible. There are also security risks. For example, the western ports and the western routes using Bab al-Mandeb, etc. regions, these were absolutely risky and absolutely vulnerable because of the Houthi rebels, because of the piracy that was affecting these regions. And therefore, why not counter and therefore use the Asian side as well? Why just look at Western countries to support and look at them as a market? Why not Eastern countries? For example, the ASEAN countries can be seen also as a market. Why is there an obsession with West alone? That becomes a policy focus as well. So therefore, we see, and the author is saying, in fact, China has already started investing in and around regions of South Asia, not just itself, but when it comes to increasing its own trade, China is investing in other countries as well. Why can't we invest at least in our country, for instance, in the northeastern sector? Chinese investments have automatically started infiltrating Myanmar as a region. Why can't we at least ensure our connectivity with the northeastern states or northeastern states with ASEAN as a trade bloc? So therefore, it will also be very important to strategically or geostrategically counter China by using trade, by using infrastructure, by enhancing connectivity, and truly realizing the dream of Act East and not keep it on paper. So these are the issues and concerns. Last but not the least, the author is also giving a certain form of suggestion. The author is saying, our policy is absolutely focused towards ensuring if one industry is not performing well, we will start producing other goods from another industry. If one country is not trading very well or we do not have good trade ties, we replace it with another country. And therefore, the author says this kind of a quick fix solution should not be the case. Why? Because while negotiating trade deals is very important in a time of globalization, but we cannot completely ignore the fact that first looking within our home and fixing structural reforms at home. For example, logistics, infrastructure, ensuring every industry from India is given a chance, every region from India is utilized. For instance, you would have heard about one district, one product. The idea of specialization based on regional specificities. So therefore, structural reforms, for example, infrastructure, highways, inland connectivities, port and hinterlands, dry ports, the connectivity using Northeast to the ASEAN sectors, etc. These have to be reformed. The ease of doing business, single window clearances, lack of bureaucratic reforms can create a problem. So the policy inertia should be 360-degree in its approach. That means we should not just be focusing on country A, shifting from country A to country B. We must not be shifting from product A to product B. Rather, we must be focusing on holistic structural reforms at home. That becomes a case in point. Lastly, let's just read what the author is saying in beautiful language. Therefore, the author says, the highways in the northeastern areas are not just highways for ensuring the logistics supply, ease of supply of merchandise. Rather, they have become checkpoints and choke points because of insurgency operations. Roads exist on paper. Customs offices are understaffed. That means custom related procedures are very, very cumbersome. The storage facilities, warehousing facilities are not available in these ports, and therefore even the scrapping of the FMR is leading to a bigger chaos. We say that surveillance has replaced commerce. We are not ensuring commerce in the northeastern regions, rather we are just ensuring surveillance in those regions. No longer corridors of trade. They are no longer corridors of trade, but they are grids structured by counter-insurgency operation. Goods do not move, but it is only the troops that do a movement in the northeastern regions. We wanted to use Northeast as a bridge for the ASEAN countries, but this is only on paper. The bridge never left the drawing board. So this becomes an important aspect that we were discussing. So on these lines, you can attempt a question. India's exports are concentrated in few states, while the northeastern sector remains underutilized as a trade bridge. Discuss the challenges and vulnerabilities of this pattern. Here, you can talk about India's exports, and therefore, in the introduction, talk about how India's export-led policy or export-led growth is again back into focus. Why? Because of the strain created by the tariff imposed by the Trump administration. That is something that you can give. Always give an introduction based on current relevance. You automatically tell the examiner that I know why you are asking me a question specifically on the worry of India's exports. And therefore, you can say that India's export is something that we are viewing as in order to ensure the export-led growth. But these kind of Trump administration related erratic policies have created a concerning trend. You can also mention the recently signed trade deal between India and UK in order to enhance the trade exports. Then you can come on to the major aspects of it, and you can say that exports from India are concentrated in few states. Give examples, the 70% data, etc. You can say the exports are neglected from certain regions. You can also talk about briefly the reasons of the place being neglected. Please also note, the question is not about just providing data. The question is about understanding and answering why does this kind of a pattern create a challenge and vulnerability. So please note, just writing data or just writing Northeast is neglected will not answer the question. The question needs to be answered after giving data, substantiating the first part. By substantiating the first part, you have just given data to add and elaborate the first part. The main body of the answer is still asking you, for example, the problem of regional imbalance, the problem of economic vulnerability, the problem of strategic autonomy and countering China, the problem of over-reliance on maritime routes, the problem of not diversifying India's export basket. So that is the focus of your answer. The body should be concentrating in that context, right? Let's move on to another article. Mistrust in Ladakh, and therefore also another article related to this editorial was on the front page of today's Delhi edition. So let's understand the timeline and the issues associated with the protests, the violent protests that have been going on in Ladakh and in Leh, and that have been the focus for a lot of operations as well. So the timeline is that in 2019, with the enactment of the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act, the state of Jammu and Kashmir was bifurcated from the region of Ladakh. Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh were both constituted as union territories. Jammu and Kashmir was made a union territory with a legislature. That means some form of political representation. But Ladakh was made a union territory without legislature. And therefore, this kind of lack of political representation in any form had to be contested by the people of Ladakh. This form of downgrading by the center had to be contested, and there would be discontent that was an obvious nature. So therefore, because it was constituted as a union territory without legislature, there have been significant demands in the last 5 to 6 odd years. One of the first and foremost demand is about ensuring statehood is given to the region of Ladakh and Leh. So therefore, the first demand is of statehood, ensuring that they are represented, they have the ability to form their own government and regulate their own processes. The demand for democratic decentralization in the form of statehood has been at the forefront of the protests. Another demand is about giving sixth schedule status. That means till now certain states, for example, certain states like Assam, Tripura, etc., are in the sixth schedule, and therefore what is the advantage of being in the sixth schedule? If there is a particular area that has a significant tribal population, you would have known that tribal populations are often worrisome about any kind of infiltration of outsiders, the non-tribal individuals. And therefore, sixth schedule ensures that there is huge amount of autonomy given to these tribal autonomous district councils that can be formed in sixth schedule area to regulate their own practices, their own customs. There also a lot of land renting activities. So any kind of land that is to be given or transferred from a tribal to a non-tribal is prohibited in these sixth schedule areas. It is regulated by these autonomous district councils. Even the license for minor minerals or minor mines are to be regulated by these autonomous district councils, reducing the fear that outsiders will come, take up mining activities and leave the tribal areas in an underdeveloped region. The money lending activities are also protected in these regions. These administrative district councils are also very powerful. In fact, certain laws and state laws are not applicable in these regions if they are not in sync with the tribal customs and the tribal needs. They can be modified before application in these regions. So therefore, an area which is tribal dominated can get a lot of rights, autonomy, and the ability to regulate and govern themselves if they are added in the sixth schedule. There are also concerns about the immigration of outsiders. That means outsiders, the fear that outsiders will come into these regions, try to take up their jobs, resources, and there is going to be competition. Therefore, demands also include the reservations for the domicile or the locals along with substantial political representation. So these demands have been at the forefront. Multiple high communities, multiple high interaction communities have been formed between the center and the representatives of these demands from Ladakh, and the center has been renegotiating. In fact, the center has said we were ready to concede to most of these demands that we are discussing constantly with the representatives. But because the timeline was being extended, multiple hunger strikes was taken up by multiple civil society organizations, and therefore in one of these hunger strikes, few of the protesters died in clashes with the police, in clashes with the enforcement agencies. Few of them were taken to the hospital because their state of the health had deteriorated, and because of the deterioration of the health, multiple people and youth, radicalized youths in fact, came to the streets of Ladakh, Leh, protesting that their leaders are not respected or their demands are not being heard. These clashes led to vandalizing, a lot of burning of offices, public property, etc., and led to, in these clashes, the death of certain protesters as well. After these clashes, recently a curfew has been imposed in these disturbed areas. Now, let's understand what are the problems at stake. The first problem at stake is associated with political legitimacy. The problem is relating to the political legitimacy and trust. What does that mean? This means that if you are dealing with citizens of the country, as the central government, it is absolutely important to ensure the least amount of force as much as possible. Isn't that the case? So therefore, the idea is to ensure that the center must act and respond in such a way that if there are legitimate demands of the people and the people are making those legitimate demands in a non-violent manner, in a non-violent way, the center must concede to those demands or at least give heed to those demands. Political legitimacy and trust is very important for an area to have, specifically an area that is located in a strategically important region. Why is that the case? We have already seen an example in the context of Northeast. It is a strategically important area, for example, for connectivity in the northeastern states. Yes, but the area is not controlled well. There is a lot of instability because of the discontent against the government, because of the insurgency, because of lack of development. So it is very important to ensure that your local population in the country is favoring and is wanting to continue with the country, believes in the systems of the country, believes in the fact that the central government or the government will pay heed to their legitimate demands. So we need what is called as political legitimacy and trust in that region. This region is strategically important. Why? Because it is adjoining very sensitive areas, for example, the Aksai Chin region, for example, the Galwan region. These are the regions in which India and China had automatically clashed for years and years. There was a major military standoff that lasted for years and therefore still is slowly settling. So in these regions, can we afford to make our people angry? In these regions, can we afford for instability to happen? In these regions, can we afford for these kind of tensions to brew? What is that a problem? The problem is that if the youth are radicalized, they are troubled, they are discontented, this creates a fertile ground for external hostile forces to further brainwash them, to further radicalize them. Therefore, there is a form of fear where external hostile forces can also want further destabilization of the Ladakh situation. The youth radicalization can become a major issue and this can lead to a full-blown insurgency in another pocket of India that can brew. So therefore, it is also important to note, for example, recently, we'll also read the editorial now. Recently, Sonam Wangchuk, a very prominent leader, in fact, the face of Ladakh, a climate activist, has been on hunger strike, has led to multiple development in the region, is running an NGO that leads to a huge amount of education, development, and a lot of worries of Ladakh have been solved by him. So therefore, in this context, taking away his NGO license, taking away his FCRA license can be seen as a chilling effect on civil society to flourish, can be seen as an extreme step against those individuals that are protesting peacefully. And therefore, certain allegations on him for instigating the revolt, for instigating violence can be certainly hard-hitting. So constraining civil society, for example, the NGOs, or reversing and revoking FCRA licenses can be a major problem. Another major problem is the balance. How does the center ensure that what has to be enforced? Do we allow for dialogue or do we first take up force in order to just react to the violent situation? Force alone can of course not be the answer. Therefore, force and dialogue both have to go together. In fact, Ladakh has not shown any previous incidents of insurgency, of violence, of protests, etc. And therefore, as minimum use of force should be the case in point. Right? Now, let's come to another editorial. Government revokes the FCRA licensing of Wangchuk's organization. Sonam Wangchuk, as we had discussed, has been at the forefront of the struggle for the people of Ladakh, for their rights, and also has ensured himself, because of his expertise, his own initiative, and the organization that he's running, he's ensured multiple educational reforms in that region. In fact, very popular film called Three Idiots was based, Amir Khan's character was based on Sonam Wangchuk as well. So therefore, he was on a hunger strike for very long to demand certain kind of statehood and rights for the people of Ladakh, and therefore was protesting the decision of downgrading Ladakh and leaving Ladakh without any form of political representation. The center has performed a major crackdown, and this is something you can write in GS paper 2. There are multiple questions on civil society, and therefore in civil society, you can say that there is a tendency of the state. In fact, this year also there was a question that civil society organization or NGOs are sometimes seen as anti-state, and therefore this can be an easy example that till today maybe the FCRA license of Wangchuk's organization was not revoked, but yesterday or day before, with the kind of violent protests, it was easy to blame him, and therefore the center said that it is him who is instigating this revolt, it is him who is instigating these kind of protests. In fact, the center also blames that he could be working, or his organization could be getting certain funds from external sources, deliberately trying to disrupt the peace of India. Now that is a very big allegation. These kind of allegations of accounts related problems or instigating deliberately the violence in that region on a person as big as him, on a person who has showcased his leadership skills time and again, can be a major problem. And therefore, the FCRA licenses are basically given to those NGOs, non-governmental organizations, that are willing to receive foreign funding. It is a method of regulating how this foreign funding is utilized by these NGOs. There are some prohibited activities where the NGOs cannot utilize this. For example, they cannot take up any conversion related activities. They cannot sponsor any protests related to the funds that they have received, etc. There are also certain members who cannot receive the international funding. For example, MLAs, media outlets, journalists, etc. So that they are not working at the directions of an external party. So these are the reasons for an FCRA license, to ensure that any international aid that is coming within the country is not misutilized, is only utilized for the intended purpose. And therefore, randomly cancelling this without giving proper details, the Ministry of Home Affairs has revoked the FCRA licenses and suspended the FCRA licenses of Sonam Wangchuk, of the organization called SECMOL, Students Education and Criminal Movement of Ladakh. So this is also an example that you can give in GS paper 2 between the clash of civil society and government, and why a collaboration is required. This kind of a behavior or relationship is detrimental for the development of the country. Right? Let's come to another editorial. Cooling rights in a sweltering south. Now, what does this mean? This basically means from GS paper 1, either from climate change perspective, from changing weather patterns perspective, either from GS paper 2, that means the vulnerable sections that are often the victims of this kind of heating that we are seeing, heat waves that we witness, or from GS paper 3 relating to environment and environmental justice and the impact of these kind of environment, global warming, climate change, etc. on different people differently. That means even though there is climate change, even though there is global warming, it does not impact a person sitting in an AC room, that means the developed north, as compared to a laborer working in the MG Narega scheme in the developed south, for example, in the developing country. So it is important from all these perspectives. Let's understand the motive of this article. The gist of this article is talking about the disparity between developed countries and developing countries. So the global north means developed countries, while the global south represent the developing countries. Now, what is the disparity? The disparity basically means that in the households in USA, a research says that in the United States of America, 90% of the households owned an AC, an air conditioner. While when we look at the Indian national average, the AC ownership is only around 5%, that too only concentrated in the urban rich individuals. And that is the disparity between the cooling needs and the cooling demand and the cooling provided in developed countries versus developing countries. A huge disparity. 90% of the households have an AC in United States, but in India, it is only concentrated to 5% of households. That is a concerning number. Therefore, let's understand the problems associated with it. And therefore, the editorial says cooling or cooling options, for example, AC, coolers, fans, etc., should be seen not as a comfort, rather, it should be seen as a right with the changing situations. Why? Because of climate change and global warming, heat waves are increasing in multiple countries. Heat waves also in the tropical countries that are also synonymous to the global south are increasing. Multiple heat waves are creating vulnerability for these individuals, and therefore it is a matter not of comfort but rather a matter of health and survival for individuals. We see temperatures in summers soaring to 42 degrees, 45 degrees, sometimes 47 degrees as well. We often are confined in our AC spaces. But what about the laborers? What about the people or the street vendors working outdoors? So heat waves, according to WHO, is almost leading to 4,89,000 deaths from the year 2001 due to heat exposure. That is a huge number. In fact, more than 20,000 out of these deaths are from India alone. Now imagine death only because of miserable conditions and miserable temperature. It can lead to heat stroke, it can lead to severe damage, and if not treated well, it can lead to dehydration related multiple complications. So therefore, cooling should not be seen as a comfort, rather as a right. In fact, more so in the developing countries. Why more so in the developing countries? Summers, even in the United States or the northern countries, for example, the countries situated it at a 40-degree latitude, etc., would still experience mild summers, not extreme summers. But countries in the tropical regions will experience extremely high summers. So therefore, this becomes a major issue of life, survival, and death when it comes to developing countries. So heat waves are only increasing due to climate change, and India or developing countries are one of the most affected regions in that context. This is also an issue of inequality or equity based issue. Only 5% of Indian households own an AC, and this exposes the north-south divide, or the divide between urban rich and rural poor, the divide between developing countries and developed countries. Think of it also in another way. What is the primary kind of occupation in which people in developing countries are engaged in? People in the developing countries are often engaged in occupations such as primary occupations like agriculture, in occupations like construction. That means labor intensive workforce is the pattern when it comes to developing countries. While developed countries have what is called as the IT workforce, developed countries have what is called as the services workforce, right? And therefore, offices in the developed countries are never impacted due to weather fluctuations. But because in India, most of the workforce is in primary occupations such as agriculture, construction, street vendors, etc., they are exposed to any kind of weather fluctuation. So the labor in India, in fact, 80% of the workforce working in informal sectors, outdoor and heat exposed sectors, are therefore bearing the brunt of this. Therefore, cooling is not just comfort but a matter of right. Another reason and place why cooling or cooling solutions are very important. Have you heard about multiple cases where India or Indian hospitals had the supply of vaccines, medicines, etc., but they could not be stored in proper temperature controlled environment, and that led to wastage of a lot of supplies. Therefore, we see that for ensuring basic public health systems are continuing, we need proper medical cooling facilities as well, reaching not just district hospital, but even primary healthcare hospitals, diagnostic facilities carrying blood samples, etc. So therefore, in order to ensure that healthcare systems are sustained according to the need that they have, we need these kind of cooling, vaccine storage, etc. Last but not the least, these kind of cooling solutions are also important to ensure food security. Huge amount of food, for example, horticulture, vegetables, fruits, etc., is wasted because of post-harvest losses. There are hardly any temperature-cooled vans for transportation. There is not a cold storage near to the farm gate, and this leads to a lot of spoilage and rotten produce. So it is also important to prevent and reduce food wastage and ensure food security in the developing countries. So this is what the editorial says. Cooling should not be seen as a right, should not be seen as a comfort, rather as a right. And therefore, let's just read the data again. The WHO has spoken about, from the estimate of 2000 to 2019, heat exposure has led to more than 4 lakh global deaths. A huge number, the data set that you can also use. We need cooling for infrastructure that can ensure proper public health systems, the examples of vaccine coolings, etc. In India, almost 80% of the labor force is engaged in sectors that are exposed to any kind of heat. For example, agriculture, construction, and street vending jobs. So this becomes the issue that we are discussing. Now let's come to another editorial. Why India's urban definition is failing its growing towns. Now, this is important from GS paper 1 perspective relating to the topic urbanization. This can also be asked in prelims because the definition is again in focus. Please note that we take up census related exercises. The last was taken up in 2011 and the next one will begin in 2027. And therefore, in that context, if we want to enumerate, if we want to count how many urban centers are there, how much is the urban population, we will first have to define what is called as an urban area. And therefore, the Registrar General of India and Census Commissioner has basically told the states, has directed the states that we will continue to keep the same definition of what is an urban area as that was, as what it was in 2011. So the 2011 definition of what will be a census town will be retained even in the 2027 census. That was the direction that was given by the Registrar General of India. Why? So that a good comparison can be made. That means from 2011 to 2027, how much has urbanization or the urban population grown with the same criteria that is used to judge the two timelines or to judge the 2 years. So in order to keep a fair comparison, the same definition is retained by the Registrar General. But there are concerns with this definition. Let's understand first what is the definition. Now, according to the census of 2011, an urban unit can be either of the two things. One, an urban unit can be a statutory town. What do you mean by a statutory town? A statutory town means any kind of city that has a registered municipality registered in that area. So any municipal council exists in that area, or a municipal corporation exists in that area, or any other form of urban local body, for example, a town body, etc., exists in that area. So the existence of any urban local body, for example, a municipality or a municipal corporation or a nagar panchayat that exists in that area automatically is considered under the definition of a town or an urban area. If there is no urban local body, for example, a municipality, in certain really small towns, they can still be considered as urban areas if they fulfill the census definition and therefore can be called as census towns. So what is the census definition? The census definition simply means that you have to have basically a minimum population of 5,000 individual. That area must have a minimum population of 5,000 individual, and 75% of the working age group male individuals should be occupied with occupations that are not agricultural in nature. That means in activities such as secondary education, tertiary occupation, etc. So 75% of the male, please focus on the word, 75% of the male main working age group should be engaged in non-agricultural activities. For example, manufacturing, for example, services, etc. and the density of the population. That means urban areas are supposed to be densely packed. People are living very close to each other. There is hardly any land left, for example, like how in the rural areas. So therefore, the density, the people per unit area should be around 400 persons per square kilometer. And therefore, these are the three aspects. If the region fulfills these three aspects, then that region is also called as the census town, right? So therefore, let's understand what are the problems in this definition. The author says one of the major issues with this definition is the overly rigid 400 persons per square kilometer, 75%, 5,000 and above. It is an overly rigid and arbitrary criteria. There are certain census towns where there might not be 400 people per square kilometer related criteria. Yet those areas are showcasing proper urban kind of features. For example, gig economy workers, for example, peri-urban areas, etc. So this extremely rigid and arbitrary criteria reduces the scope for recognizing the town based on the practices or urban traits. The second problem is relating to not catering or including women while counting the workforce of that area. There is 75% of male workers in non-agricultural fields, and therefore this creates a gender bias in workforce. What about the women working in domestic spheres? What about the women working as service providers? What about the women in these areas working as gig workers? For instance, there are multiple peri-urban areas on the peripheries of urban areas that are almost reflecting proper urban traits, yet not are recognized because of this strict definition. There is a major mismatch also between census towns and statutory towns. Why is that the case? Statutory towns, the governance is using an urban local body. That means a municipal corporation, etc. This leads to a lot of autonomy in planning, in decision making by the people and the representatives that are elected by the people. Urban local bodies, for example, municipalities, take up very good plans in order for urban planning and urban development. But census towns do not have these kind of urban local bodies. Census towns are just towns in the namesake, but the governance, the administration is still done by rural panchayat bodies or rural local bodies. And therefore, we say that this also creates what is called as a governance vacuum or a governance deficit. It should be constituted. Once you make a census town, they should be given the autonomy to form their own urban local bodies to take up better urban related planning. Please also note, even though census towns are a town in making example of a big tier 1 city, tier 2 cities, but until and unless you create an urban local body, how will you ensure proper planning? The biggest problem of our urban areas is haphazard planning. Towns are created without any planning. Urban areas are spreading. Urban sprawl is happening without any planning. So therefore, it was important to ensure that census towns are not just made towns on paper, but even the proper governance relating to towns was initiated in those regions. There is also a problem of seasonality of work. In these peri-urban regions, the peripheral regions, there is often a movement of the worker. The worker sometimes is working in urban occupations, and sometimes the worker is going back to his villages to work in the agricultural fields. So how do you account for this seasonality is also a problem when it comes to this definition. A major issue also is underestimation. Scholars suggest that most of the rural areas, a lot of peri-urban, peripheral rural areas that are automatically displaying urban traits. For example, when it comes to occupation, people engaged, the kind of services provided, the kind of outlets there are, etc. Yet they are not included because of these arbitrary decisions and arbitrary rigid criteria. So these are the issues that we will talk about when it comes to the problem. So the urban local bodies are more autonomous, as we have already read. For example, the municipality, etc. While Panchayati Raj institutions are limited to implementing what has just been said by the center or centrally designed welfare schemes. Hence, urban status, if granted to a settlement, would ensure development of the area using autonomy. Census towns and peri-urban regions, despite having dense population, non-agricultural livelihoods, etc., remain excluded from these urban local bodies, that is the urban governance. And therefore, this becomes the problem. What are the implications? The implication is that first, most of these appear rural on paper, but in fact, these are informal urban clusters that are existing. The 75% of male workforce is an outdated criteria. We should also include women, the same thing that we have discussed. The seasonality of workforce is not taken into account. The male workforce criteria is also problematic, and therefore these are the problems relating to the definition of urbanization. Let's come to another article. Poll panel to tweak counting process for postal ballots from Bihar election. Now, postal ballots mean you are not coming to the proper polling booth to cast your vote. You can cast your vote from wherever you are in a mail kind of a format, right? You can post your vote and therefore they will be counted. Is that available for everyone? Is that available for you and me? Absolutely not. It is available for instance, service professionals. It is available, for instance, those individuals who are 85 years of age, that means the elderly citizen not capable of coming directly to the polling booth. It is also available for certain individuals with disability. It is also available for those individuals who are on election duty. So these individuals can avail what is called as the postal ballot system. Now, in this context, you can remember this for prelims, that who all are eligible for casting their vote in postal ballot. That means they do not have to go to the polling booth and can still cast their vote. What the Election Commission has recently notified is that there are two types of votes that are cast. One are the EVM votes that are cast by people who go to the polling booth and press the button, and one are postal booths or postal ballot votes that are cast. Now, these both have to be read. That means they both have to be counted after the election process is over. Now, earlier there was a case where sometimes EVM counting used to finish because it is easier to count EVM votes. It is almost an automated process. So, on the counting day, there were instances where the EVM counting would finish and then the physical postal ballot votes would be counted, or their postal ballot counting would still continue, because it was a slower process, and therefore few of them would still be counted after the rounds of EVM, 12 rounds, 16 rounds, etc. are already over. This used to create certain problems associated with creating, even when there were election contests which were closely contested. That means 50 votes, 60 votes, 100 votes, 200 votes. There was often a problem relating to counting these physical votes, because physical votes sometimes can be tampered with. There can be a little problem related to it when it comes to a close contest. And therefore, the Election Commission has said that before the last two EVMs are to be counted, before the last two rounds of EVM are to be counted, before that the postal ballot votes have to be counted and finished. After these postal ballot votes have been counted and finished, then the last two EVMs or the last two rounds will be counted to give the final result. And that is the only change that has been made in the Bihar election by the Election Commissioner. That's it. Let's come to another article. Muscle Matters, Rethinking Obesity with Resistance Training. Now, this is only important to give suggestions in GS paper 2 health or in GS paper 3 relating to technology, bio, etc. So just as a value addition, you need it and nothing else. Please note that when most of the people are trying to lose weight, it is about ensuring that they reduce their calories, or they run a lot, walk a lot, and therefore try to keep focusing on reducing the amount of calories that they have burned in that instance. A lot of people, while losing the weight, in fact are losing not just fat, but along with fat, they are losing what is called as very important muscle mass as well. So muscle mass becomes very, very problematic if that is lost, because that can lead to major problems later on. It can lead to a lot of fractures. It can make you brittle, it can lower your metabolism, and it can lead to degenerative diseases in the old age as well. So therefore, we see that if you lose weight around your bones and other skeleton muscle is very, very important to ensure that your bone health is also very, very important. So sarcopenia is the progressive loss of skeletal muscle mass. The skeleton muscle mass that is holding your joints together, that is ensuring the movements of your joints together. So therefore, this loss of muscle mass, skeleton muscle mass, can be a very, very problematic issue. So therefore, we say when a person is obese, that means overweight, along with that the person is losing skeletal muscle mass, we call it sarcopenic obesity, and that makes it very, very difficult. The fat is often masking the muscle loss. That means this is major for a person who is little fat, because you'll not maybe see the muscle mass losing very, very easily, because the fat is often hiding the loss of muscle that is happening. Most of the methods of obesity management, in fact, are overlooking this muscle loss as a problem. Therefore, we say that there should be a suggestion of what is called as resistance training. Now, resistance training does not mean that you are going to the gym and you are basically using equipment only. You can use this in the form of body weight exercises also. For example, lunges, for example, squats, for example, other form of push-ups, planks, etc. Those can also be the case. So resistance training does not require a gym, equipment, etc., but ensures that while you are losing weight, you are also building healthy muscle. And therefore, the protein and healthy muscle combination is very important even while losing weight or treating obesity. Obesity treatment does not simply mean calorie deficit and ensuring calories are burned in the form of a workout, for example, a run, HIIT training, etc. But strength-related training is also equally important. Let's come to another important news article. India-Russia discuss BRICS grain exchange plan to boost agricultural trade ties. Now, this is just a discussion where the Prime Minister had met the Deputy Prime Minister of Russia, and there was a discussion about initiating a grain exchange, that means an agricultural exchange platform of the BRICS nation. And therefore, these are enhancement of the ties in BRICS. This is important from GS paper 2 as well as from the prelims point of view. Why? Because we are trying to enhance the ties when it comes to engagement for contingent reserves, when it comes to UPI applicability, when it comes to NDB, National Development Bank, etc. And now also in the area of agricultural ties. So therefore, when it comes to BRICS, you must know it was formed in 2009. Later, it became BRICS with the joining of South Africa in 2010. The members are, of course, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, along with Iran, UAE, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Indonesia that were added as later members. It almost accounts to 40 to 45% of the world's population. There is a bank, the National Development Bank, associated with BRICS organization. There is no permanent secretariat. That is also very, very important. And the 2025 summit was held in Rio in the country Brazil. So those are the important factors that you must note. Another important prelims information is relating to the visit of Defense Minister Rajnath Singh to the country Morocco. He basically went to Morocco to inaugurate India's first, please note, this is very important, India's first overseas defense manufacturing facility. So there can be a question or there can be one statement in prelims that India's first overseas, not in India, defense manufacturing of course happens in India, but the first overseas defense manufacturing facility has been launched in Berkid in Morocco. The city called Berkid in the country Morocco, and that becomes an important context in also ensuring the ties between India and African countries are also improving. There is a lot of market for small ammunition, bulletproof jackets, armored vehicles, etc. in the African continent, and therefore India is trying to enter that market and also enhance its manufacturing facilities abroad. Russia was the main supplier to the African need till now, but with Russia, being occupied with certain instances, for example, the Ukraine issues. Therefore, in that context, India is stepping up and taking an advantage wherever there is a vacuum or a gap. Another important news article, you just have to remember the NCST. Bring back tribals who fled Maoist conflicts. Now, a body called National Commission for Scheduled Tribe has directed the Chhattisgarh government and center to ensure a proper policy is made to target and give relief and rehabilitation to those individuals and tribals that have fled the Maoist violence and insurgency in the Chhattisgarh region, right? So in that context, the only thing that you need to know is what is NCST for prelims. National Commission for Scheduled Tribe. Please note, it is a constitutional body. It is a body made under Article 338A of the Constitution by the 89th Constitutional Amendment Act. It had basically separated from NCSC, that is National Commission for Scheduled Caste, and therefore these two bodies were made into different bodies by the 89th Constitutional Amendment Act. The idea is to oversee that all safeguards under law or constitution are being followed for the STs. It comprises of chairperson, a vice chairperson and 3 members. These are appointed by the president for a 3-year term period. It can also inquire into complaints relating to rights violation of the tribals. They are also supposed to advise the government when it comes to any tribal policy and matter. And they also send a report annually to the President of India, who further lays it sometimes in the parliament as well. So that is National Commission for Scheduled Tribe. The last topic, Coffee Board to hold EU rule awareness. Now you would know there are multiple European Union rules that ensure that a certain product is to be exported in a certain way. It is to be grown in a certain way. There are concerns of pesticide use. There are concerns of primary value addition. There are concerns and strict rules relating to any kind of food processing. There are also certain criteria and parameters relating to how a product is going to be plucked, etc. So there are major export or import related strict obligations when it comes to the European Union. And therefore, when most of our farmers or exporters are not following up on these rules and regulations, a lot of our Indian exports is rejected by the European Union markets, which is why the Coffee Board has ensured that they will take up awareness programs to ensure that coffee growers or the coffee industry is therefore educated about the demand of the European Union when it comes to the regulations required, when it comes to the growing requirements, when it comes to the drying requirements, when it comes to primary processing requirements. And therefore, the Coffee Board is important in that context. In fact, a previous year question has been asked relating to Coffee Board as one of the provisions. First, it is a statutory organization under the Coffee Act of 1942. It is under the administrative control. Now, this is something that most of you often confuse. It is not under the administrative control of Ministry of Agriculture. It is under the administrative control of Ministry of Commerce and Industry. It is headquartered in Bangalore, and therefore it takes up research for better varieties, extension services to coffee growers, market studies to understand the export market potential, and promotion of Indian coffee brand or Indian coffee exports. So that's all that you need from the Coffee Board segment. With that, we have come to an end for today's session. If you're taking back something informative, make sure that you like the video, comment down below. We love to hear from you. In case you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, now is the time. On that note, allow me to sign off. Take care. Have a wonderful day ahead.